You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 18th of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Yes, I am confident, but of course, I know that there's still a lot of hard work ahead of me. I'm happy to address this work, but I'm definitely confident what my running for a second mandate is concerned.
EU leaders will decide today whether they want to give Ursula von der Leyen another shot at the top job. We'll assess her chances and ask what Europe without her might look like. China's third plenum concludes. We'll explore what this agenda-setting meeting means for the future of Beijing. As the courts in the US become increasingly politicised, we'll look at Joe Biden's plans to mitigate this in the future. Plus... all schools and universities in Bangladesh are to be closed indefinitely as a number of protesters are killed in demonstrations against a job quota rule. Then could beleaguered Boeing be bouncing back? We'll have a roundup of aviation news and we'll find out who's flying high at the Emmy nominations. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Germany plans to halve its military aid to Ukraine next year, cutting it to $4.35 billion. That's according to a draft of the 2025 budget. US President Joe Biden has said for the first time he would consider pulling out of the presidential race if any of his doctors said he had a medical condition. He's currently suffering from mild symptoms of COVID-19. And a car drove into the terrace of a cafe in the 20th arrondissement in northern Paris on Wednesday evening, leaving 1 dead and 6 injured. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, in June, European Union leaders endorsed Ursula von der Leyen for a second term. But her real test comes today as she attempts to win over a majority of the European Parliament's 720 lawmakers. They'll decide whether to appoint the German centre-right former defence minister, who's 65, for another 5 years, providing continuity at the top of the 27-nation EU at a time of external and internal challenges. Well, I'm joined now by Anchal Vora, who's a foreign policy analyst based in Brussels. Anchal, welcome to Monocle Radio. It's lovely to have you here. Now, we know that for von der Leyen to win, she needs 361 votes. And I wondered if you could run through the numbers in various political groupings and whether that total is achievable.
Well, technically it is achievable because her party, the European People's Party, which represents centre-right political groups in Europe, has 188 seats and continues to be the biggest party. The Socialists have 136 and the Socialists have decided to back her. Then the Renew Liberal members have 77. So technically she has the numbers. The trouble is whether each and every parliamentarian in these groups will vote for her or not. And they have their own independent considerations.
Well, what are those considerations? What are the opposing demands of the parties within the European Parliament?
Well, a whole range of demands, actually. But I think there are two critical themes here in Europe three that politics is revolving around. So far, or at least over the last 5 years, we haven't seen much feuding over response to or European response to the Ukraine war, other than Mr. Viktor Orban often creating troubles. But the two issues that they often disagree on are linked to how to deal with the asylum seekers, how to deal with irregular immigrants, and how to go forward with green transition and achieve the goal set in the Green Deal, which is to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050. But this, of course, involves a whole slew of legislations and laws and things, that will basically transform the European society here.
And
so
what will the Greens want to hear in order to support her?
Sorry, say that again?
I wonder what the Greens will want to hear in order to support her. We know that they lost 18 seats in June's election. They have a lower tally, but they are still pretty influential in the race. What do they want von der Leyen to give them?
So first, they're influential because if they vote for her, then she doesn't need the party's further right. She doesn't need the far right support. And what they want from her is, I think they kept the bar pretty low because they've lost seats and they want to keep influencing policy when it comes to the Green Deal. They definitely don't want her to go with Giorgia Meloni. They don't want her to crack any under-the-table deals with Giorgia Meloni. So they'll be listening to von der Leyen's speech this morning very carefully. But of course, they want to hear an assurance on von der Leyen pursuing the Green Deal and going ahead with it. So and I think the EPP, the Conservatives, have sort of, the Greens feel have ditched them or betrayed them on several counts when it comes to certain aspects of the Green Deal. So I think they're looking for more assurances from von der Leyen that she's going to be pushing hard for it.
Is her support for Israel also a factor for some voters?
I find that question very interesting. A lot of parliamentarians that we speak to independently say that it is a consideration. And in this vote, there's no whip. There's no party whip, which means, a party cannot tell its people how to. They can influence, but can't really issue a whip. It's a secret vote, technically speaking, at least. So the members of the parliament can independently decide who they want to vote for. And there are people who are very concerned about the events in Gaza.
Do you think that there could be an upset? Is there a possibility that she simply won't get it?
That's a hard one. I think she has the numbers, and I think that she has reached out to enough people to make sure that she gets the votes. And I think if there's not a major deal with Meloni, which I don't think so far is, then the Greens will back her. So, and I think that's also good policy for the Greens. So if you ask me, I think she'll scrape through.
She barely scraped through with the same coalition back in 2019. She was elected, I think, by a tiny margin of 9 votes. But of course, since then, she has had many successes. What do you think have been her notable achievements?
I think the COVID Recovery Fund, and I think the fact that she's, EU presidents have not sort of been seen as powerful global leaders traditionally, but she has tried to represent herself as a wartime EU president. And if you look at some of her campaign material, you get a sense of, she's definitely portraying herself as a president of the European Union in a very political context, and not just representing EU as a trade lobby, as it were. So I think a big success really has been staying focused on European unity when it comes to the response to Ukraine. But also, I'd say the Green Deal, she was quite a supporter of it. So, going forward, green transition is the big question here in Europe. I'm assuming also in the UK, and she's quite keen on, at least individually keen on pushing for it. But I think most importantly, she's been a face. We finally have a face to, who's responsible, who to talk to in the European Union. Is there one person that, other global leaders can reach out to?
Yeah, that famous quote, who do I call if I want to speak to Europe?
Absolutely.
Just looking at a possible other scenario, who might be a credible alternative to von der Leyen?
I think there's no consensus on a candidate. I heard Mario Draghi's name quite a lot while talking to the parliamentarians here. And he's seen as an intellectual. He's seen as somebody who could definitely do the job. He's also seen as someone who can, deal with the heads of state and their respective quirks. But he's not seen as someone heads of state can call and sort of ask for how can Brussels help them scenario. Von der Leyen is. Von der Leyen is more reachable in that sense, or that's the impression in member states.
I mean, some analysts are saying that given that there's been a move to the right within Europe, there could be an argument to have a leader who represents that shift.
Yeah, the other argument is for the progressives to have a better sort of, response to the rise of the far right and answer the questions of people who are confused about policy and have voted for far right. So, I mean, there are, if that cordon sanitaire, as it's widely being referred to, cracks, then there could be a whole range of problems. And this is politics, right? So if one ideology has more support overall, then they've got a chance to go for preserving it. And we've seen in France that finally, when it came to the far right getting into power, the leftist forces got together and said, no, hang on, that's not going to pass. So, I think they are represented and they will have a bigger representation in the parliament. So they've got their seats, but do they need to be in on the all the top positions and have now? I mean, if you ask me, I'd say I think the cordon sanitaire should absolutely be maintained.
And just finally, I mean, hypothetically, I suppose, what would the EU look like without von der Leyen at the helm?
Very difficult to imagine right now. Really difficult to imagine because has been a stable anchor, so to say, and she has I mean, if you really, I'm thinking about your question and I don't think I can come up with, I suppose Draghi is an option, but then it's just, he's someone that everybody doesn't agree on.
So when will we have the results, Anchal?
I think we'll have the results today itself.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Anchal Vora there. And this is The Globalist. It is 14:12 in Beijing, that's 7:12 here in London. The third plenum, a major meeting held roughly once every 5 years by China's ruling Communist Party, commenced on Monday and will end today. It comes as international investment banks cut their forecasts for China's growth, and the country itself reported its slowest rate of economic growth from April to June since the first quarter of 2023. Well, I'm joined now by Isabel Hilton, China expert and visiting professor at King's College London. Isabel, welcome back to the show. To start with a very basic question, what are plenums?
Good question. Plenums are meetings of the entire Central Committee. So the Central Committee changes every 5 years with the party congress. New Central Committees get announced, and that means new politburos, new standing committees. So the whole kind of governing superstructure of the Communist Party. And plenums, once a year, they all get together with about 100 various other officials, army people and so on, to discuss whatever they discuss. Now, the third plenum has traditionally been a significant one because historically it's where big economic shifts were announced. So when Deng Xiaoping decided to transform China's economy and go towards the market, this was announced at a third plenum. So every third plenum, and by the way, they're conducted in high secrecy, but every third plenum as it approaches, people look at China, look at what's not working and think, well, maybe the third plenum will fix it.
It was widely thought that this week's meeting would take place in the autumn of 2023, and that didn't happen. I wonder if there was ever an explanation and if the timing is significant at all.
Well, the party doesn't really go for explanations, as you and I might understand them, of failures to observe political timetables. But you're absolutely right. People have been waiting for this plenum. Expectation has been building. And even when it happened, and it's been happening for the past 4 days, we're still waiting for the communiqué. Thursday, the last day of the plenum, China's 8 hours ahead. Xi Jinping no doubt has made his big speech, but it hasn't appeared. So I think that, what we have had is an absolute tide of propaganda in praise of Xi Jinping, much of it directed to foreigners. Xinhua, the state news agency, is running laudatory remarks by foreigners about what a visionary Xi Jinping is. And given the backdrop of China's problems, it's hard not to conclude that really they're protesting a little bit too much. and that instead of real reform, we're getting praise of Xi Jinping as a reformer.
When China talks about reform, how does that differ to how we might interpret it?
Well, the thing that doesn't change, of course, is the dominance of the party and the dominance of Xi Jinping. That's only got bigger over the years, beginning with his first plenum, which promised a great deal in economic reform, but actually consolidated his political position. When he's talking about reform now, it's things like what the economy is going to concentrate on. And again, this is pretty heavily signalled. He's talking about new quality productive forces, which essentially means the manufacture of high technologies. Now, that's advanced technologies. That's running into resistance because the market in China isn't buoyant, and the export markets are beginning to look with alarm at a flood of cheap Chinese technology. He's talking about reform in the sense of the balance of market forces and private sector. And again, the propaganda is saying China's a great place for private sector, foreign capital must love to come back in, which is a signal that there's a bit of a shortage of foreign capital, and private business has lost confidence in the party's willingness to leave them alone to get on with it. So reading the propaganda, you can see the anxieties. The question is, how much will they actually do about it? Because the direction's been firmly, going the other way for the past 5 years.
You talked about Xi's vision, and I wonder if his overall vision has changed much, or if we've seen evidence of change during the time he's been in office.
Well, it wasn't clear right at the beginning, I think, how much of a centralizer, how much of an ideologist he was going to be. He did talk about corruption. He talked about the danger the party was in from too much, latitude in behaviour, too much corruption. Oh, and by the way, one thing the third plenum is expected to do is to confirm the expulsion from the party of a fair old list of senior people. So 2 defence ministers and a foreign minister who've disappeared in the past year we expect their expulsion will be formalised. What wasn't clear, though, I think in Xi Jinping's earlier days, that he was going to bring the party back into the centre of, if you like, the operations of China. It's always been there, and always, as far as Xi Jinping is concerned, will be there as, the primary, the unique political force. But how much it interferes in everything else, that is really what has been calibrated under Xi. So it is now in every business, including private business. It's back in as the kind of guiding power of ideology in the classroom, in the university, in the media, even in entertainment. That, I think, wasn't clear before. And Xi Jinping was expected to be a reformer, but he was expected, frankly, to move things the other way. And some of the promises at his third plenum, like, for example, a bigger role for civil society, went firmly in the other direction.
How much of a cult of personality surrounds him?
Oh, it's very large at this point. The things that you're not allowed to say about Xi Jinping, there were a number of popular memes which compared him in the days of Obama, when he was meeting Obama, and the two of them were compared, Obama to Tigger and Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. This is firmly banned. The kind of thing that if you glance at the Chinese press right now, it is all about wisdom, the brilliance of the thought. The thought itself is compulsory reading for all cadres. It's taught in schools. They're comparing him in depth of wisdom to Deng Xiaoping, which is slightly cheeky, because Deng Xiaoping's reforms went rather in the other direction. But they explain this by saying, well, he's as wise and brilliant as Deng Xiaoping, but they're facing different circumstances. Personality cult-wise, he's written himself into the constitution. He's the core leader. Every newspaper carries endless Xi Jinping on the front page and inside. You can't escape it.
I wonder if decisions made at this third plenum will have an impact on China's foreign policy. Will this meeting affect the West?
Well, it'll affect the West insofar as it affects the economy, if it does. And this plenum opened to quite a lot of very downbeat news. As you said, the economy is not doing well. There were rumours that Xi Jinping was ill, which could be misinformation, could be based on something. We don't know. But the growth figures, which came in under the predicted growth rate, were published at the beginning of the week. So it didn't open to a very positive backdrop. And unless China does manage to get the very deep-rooted problems in the economy fixed, then that role that China has played over the past 20, 30 years of pulling the global economy along is definitely over. It's been weakening as China's growth rate slowed, but it will be weakened. Now, again, as China attempts to fix this, and one of the things that is rumoured to be in the pipeline for this Congress is, for example, balancing provincial and central budgets. Now, that doesn't sound like a kind of world-shaking thing, but the fact is that provincial budgets are heavily indebted because they used to rely on property, and the centre simply takes too much. So the general languishing of China's economy, the remedy that's being applied, which is to invest much more in manufacturing of high technology, of advanced technology, as I said, that definitely affects the global economy, and that affects politics. I don't think we're going to see any slackening of the nationalist rhetoric and the rhetoric, for example, on Taiwan, or the rhetoric on support for Putin. That's, I think, not going to change as a result of this. So we should look for the signals, anything that is going to get the Chinese economy going again. But so far, we haven't really seen that.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. That's Isabel Hilton there. Now, still to come on the programme.
So you're a comedian?
Sort of.
It's not going well.
So is that a question?
Somebody hurt you, didn't they? Who was it?
Martha, can you let go of my hand now, please?
Martha, please let go. Don't you dare!
That's from the hit drama Baby Reindeer. It's been a huge popular success, but will it win an Emmy? We'll discuss the awards nominations a little later in the show. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's 7:23 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin and this is The Globalist. And joining me in the studio is the author and political journalist Terry Stiastny. Good morning to you, Terry.
Good morning.
Now today, the birthplace of Winston Churchill, Blenheim Palace, it plays host to this big European political community summit. It's Keir Starmer's first huge moment in the spotlight at home as a host. Tell us more.
Yes, so as you say, Blenheim Palace, there was a list somewhere on the government website of all the things that the European leaders are going to be offered, which include Oxfordshire strawberries and a vast quantity of scones, though that's its kind of very English atmosphere there. But the reason this is important is because obviously this is 45 European leaders meeting in Oxfordshire in this beautiful palace, and it is obviously not just the EU leaders, but people beyond the EU. And crucially, Volodymyr Zelensky is going to come there. He is going to speak. And this is a chance for Keir Starmer, as a lot of the papers are reporting this morning. So here in The Guardian, he wants to kind of renew the relationship with Europe and have a bit of a reset and try to have a more constructive engagement with Europe. And one of the key things, certainly on the British domestic agenda there, which he will be talking about with Giorgia Meloni and other people, is to do with migration. And there is other reports that Britain wants to have a kind of long-term returns agreement with the EU about potentially sending some migrants back to the rest of the EU, but then potentially Britain taking other refugees, children, for instance, who have family members in the UK. But I think there are some questions about, given the number of big summits at the moment, it's obviously important for Keir Starmer as a new Prime Minister. But I think some of the other leaders are potentially getting a bit of summit fatigue at the moment.
I love the piece in Politico which describes it as political speed dating for Keir Starmer.
Yes, I think it's a good description. Politico has an article here where they're calling it Keir Starmer's Brexit reboot, but they are also very much suggesting that, yes, it's great to have this opportunity to meet lots of leaders in short order. There's a dinner with Macron in the evening. He's had the Irish Taoiseach to come to Chequers where they were sharing pints of Guinness yesterday. All this kind of thing is very important. But, Ursula von der Leyen's not going to be there because she's got to be in Strasbourg looking at her future there. Turkish leadership's not going to be there. And I think other people, some of them having just gone to the NATO summit in Washington, they're feeling, another summit again now, and you've got the EU summits going on as well. So, there's a bit of a sense that, who's getting the most out of this, and what does it really achieve in terms of talking about things like Ukraine and stuff, which are obviously very important.
Let's turn our gaze to the other side of the Atlantic now, and the news that Joe Biden, obviously the President of the United States, has COVID. But that comes to the backdrop of the news that he says he may drop out if his doctors tell him he should. Yes, and I think,
obviously the attention has been off Joe Biden for a little bit, given the assassination attempt against Donald Trump and the Republican convention going on. But I think what this has allowed is a bit more discussion that we haven't necessarily seen behind the scenes potentially about Joe Biden's future. And I'm looking at the report here in the LA Times, which is there's sort of a gradual drip of names of people now who are reported to have told Joe Biden, look, maybe it's time to reconsider. LA Times is reporting on Adam Schiff, a Democrat from California, who was saying that he had serious concerns about Biden's ability to beat Trump in November. Although it's full of the praise, he's saying he's been one of the most consequential presidents in our nation's history, lifetime of service as a senator, vice president, but our nation is at a crossroads, and saying that a second Trump presidency will undermine the very foundation of our democracy. So as you're getting, more and more reports of people saying things like this to Joe Biden, so reports that Chuck Schumer has said similar things, reports that Hakeem Jeffries, top Democrat in the House, have had private meetings with the president, Nancy Pelosi. The more and more Democrats now seem to be telling Joe Biden, look, act of God, illness, whatever it is, maybe it's time to rethink. And I mean, so much coverage about this, and of course, lots of names being thrown forward as to who might take his place. Yes, well, that's it seems to be quite technically difficult. Does it have to be Kamala Harris because it's the Biden-Harris campaign that is already up and running? Would you have to set up a whole new campaign for somebody else? But of course, there are other names which are in the frame, and people discussing whether, could this be Gretchen Whitmer? Could this be various other governors? And how do you do this at such short notice? Right. Now to France, where, of course, there is complete political turmoil, but that's not what we're talking about. No, but they're also complete political turmoil, but also the Olympics coming up. And one of the things that various people have promised over the years is that the Seine will be clean enough to swim in, and they promised that this would be ready for the triathlons and for events in the Seine. And people sort of poo-pooed this, and they said, look, this is never going to happen. It's going to be filthy. But Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, did go for her promised swim yesterday, saying it was something that Jacques Chirac, who'd promised to do it himself 30 years ago, never managed to do. She was there in her wetsuit. She went swimming, and lots of journalists went for a dip with her in the Seine. And in the Figaro, I think it's their sports editor who was the person to dive in. And he's written such a French sort of lyrical piece about what it was like to go swimming in the Seine under the beautiful sun. It was about 20 degrees on the thermometer, 5 minutes ahead of time, and people asking what the water was like, and he said it was lovely, and it was such an amazing feeling to an incroyable découverte, sensation unique, the freshness of it, the feeling of well-being and amazing happiness to swim in the historic centre of the capital, and an amazing chance, this sentiment of rediscovering the legendary Seine and all of this, very, very French, very poetic. But slightly, when he gets into the description of it, he is kind of saying, it is quite cold, and there's a bit of a current. You don't want to stay in for too long because you might get dragged out into the centre of the river. And then he just concludes this article by saying, yes, it was an amazing, unique moment, but now it just remains to watch my skin and my health in the next few days. I want to see if it's actually all right and if everyone ends up ill as a result of swimming in the Seine.
Because, of course, there will be some Olympic events taking place on the river.
Yes, I think it is part of the triathlon, and the triathlon will be one of the things where they're going to do the open water swimming section of it in the Seine, and there have been serious worries about, whether it would be clean enough for the athletes. So, he's hoping that it is.
Now, there's barely a child in the world that isn't obsessed with dinosaurs at some point in their youth. I know I was, my daughter was, and it seems to be a thing, a phase that all kids go through. Yeah. But one high-profile and high-net-worth individual has never grown out of it.
No, this is a brilliant story, and it's great. I think the Financial Times, as you would expect, has found out the name of the person who has paid $44.6 million for a 150-million-year-old Stegosaurus. Stegosaurus has a name. It's called Apex, and the name of the person who's bought it is apparently Ken Griffin, who is the founder of the Citadel hedge fund. And so, you expect he's obviously someone who has a lot of money, but this fossil is 11 foot tall, 27 foot long. It is the most valuable fossil that has ever been sold at auction. And I was kind of wondering, if you're a hedge fund founder, do you have your own kind of dinosaur museum where you put the Stegosaurus? But apparently he's going to lend it to a museum, so he's not necessarily going to keep his Stegosaurus in a special sort of Stegosaurus conservatory or something. And apparently this is not his first venture into dinosaurs. In 2018, he gave $16 million to the Field Museum in Chicago to fund the display of a cast of the biggest dinosaur ever discovered, a titanosaur. And he buys lots of things, this guy. He also paid $43 million for a copy of the US Constitution in 2021. I'm sure that's probably on the internet. And he loaned it to a museum in Arkansas. So I think he's obviously a very philanthropic person who likes to buy expensive things and then loan them to museums. But, I would quite like, I think, there is a certain thing about people who want to collect fossils and want to collect dinosaurs. And it's quite nice that they're actually going to be on public display.
Absolutely. Terry, thank you very much indeed. That's Terry Stiastany there. And now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Germany plans to halve its military aid to Ukraine next year, cutting it to $4.35 billion, according to a draft of the 2025 budget. Germany hopes Ukraine will be able to meet the bulk of its military needs with the $50 billion in loans from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets approved by the Group of Seven, and that funds earmarked for armaments will not be fully used. US President Joe Biden, under pressure from fellow Democrats to drop his re-election campaign, tested positive for COVID-19 while visiting Las Vegas on Wednesday and is self-isolating after experiencing mild symptoms, the White House said. Nearly 24 Democratic politicians have called for him to step aside in recent weeks, but Biden said he didn't feel he could pass the mantle with the country so divided, adding, however, that he would consider dropping out of the race if any of his doctors said he had a medical condition. And a car drove into the terrace of a cafe in the 20th arrondissement in northern Paris on Wednesday evening, leaving 1 dead and 6 injured, including 3 in a critical state, police said. They added the driver of the vehicle fled the scene. France is on high security alert ahead of the Paris Olympics that start on July the 26th. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Faith in the Supreme Court remains low, with 4 in 10 US adults who took part in a survey in June saying they have hardly any confidence in the people running the top judicial body. It appears their president agrees and is preparing to propose major changes to the Supreme Court and its powers in the next few weeks. Well, Natasha Lindstad is a professor of government at the University of Essex and joins me now. Natasha, good morning to you. What changes is Joe Biden considering?
Well, the main changes he's considering are term limits for the Supreme Court and an enforceable ethics code. So this is based on some of the recent scandals that have plagued Supreme Court members, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, and just overall concerns about the justices being, on the bench for decades. And there is some popular support for this. I should mention that, there's a lot of different surveys that they've taken to look at this, but it's usually landing around 2/3 of voters support term limits. It's higher amongst Democrats, somewhere between 70 and 80%, depending on the poll. But there's still a majority of Republicans and independents that also agree with term limits as well.
So I understand he's also weighing whether to call for a constitutional amendment to eliminate broad presidential immunity granted by the court in its most recent term. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, this has to do with the fact that the Supreme Court has been, facing all kinds of accusations of partisanship, that they haven't been making decisions based on just interpreting the law, but instead have been making decisions more based on what their personal or political views are.
And I wonder if that particular change, if it were to happen, could backfire on Biden. We know that Trump has often called him a criminal and will no doubt seek some sort of legal revenge for his own bruising in the courts if he gets in.
Right. That's one of the big concerns about a Trump presidency. He's claimed he's going to be dictator for a day and weaponize the justice system. And there isn't really any guarantee, in spite of the fact that there's popular support for some kind of term limits. In fact, last October, there was a bipartisan group of legal experts that were supporting an 18-year term limit for the Supreme Court. There's been a lot of work done on this. There's been a bill in 2021 that was floated in Congress about this. But in spite of all the goodwill behind this or the popular support for this, it's unlikely to go through. And then once Trump becomes the president, if he does indeed win, he has made a note of who his enemies are and that he might want to seek some sort of retribution for the criminal charges that he has faced.
Trump has been bragging about placing 3 justices on the Supreme Court who are now part of its conservative majority, who, of course, as we know, delivered a ruling in his favour just this week. I wonder, though, if Biden's call then for major changes could help animate Democrat voters.
It could, and this comes at a time when the Democrats are feeling very low. They are in disarray. They're fractured. There is a lot of pessimism about their chances in the party and with their party in terms of the election in November. So there needs to be some kind of issues to energize them, whether it be reproductive rights, voting rights, or fighting for some kind of changes to the Supreme Court. The timing of it, of course, is interesting. It's in the middle of a big campaign and very, very unlikely that these changes are going to be made before the election happens. So it might be more of a political move to try to energize the Democratic base.
And it's never going to get congressional approval, is it?
No, it's unlikely to. It's really difficult to get congressional approval on anything just because the Congress is so incredibly polarized, but also because the Republican congressmen and women do exactly what Trump wants them to do. For example, with the immigration policy, there was a bipartisan immigration bill. Trump didn't want that to be a success for the Democrats, so he instructed Republicans, even those that had written the bill or had helped write the bill, that don't don't support this. So I can't imagine anything is going to pass before this election takes place.
So, as you mentioned, Biden created a commission to issue recommendations early in his presidency, recommendations on what should happen with the judicial system. The advice was never acted upon, and I wonder if backing such changes would mark a major reversal for Biden.
I don't know if it would mark a major reversal. It just would be a major reversal for the country. We've always had this idea that Supreme Court justices are in their tenure, for life until they decide to retire. And that's been one of the, crucial, tenets of the Supreme Court, of that particular institution. So this would be a huge shift. And for many years, legal scholars had felt that this helped helped the judicial institutions be more independent from the president. But what we've seen with the way these political the way these appointments have become so political and politicized, there is, as you mentioned, just a lot of angst about the Supreme Court. And riding that, there may be eventually some changes to be made, but I don't see it happening, within the next few months.
I mean, obviously, a lot of this has been done to inoculate against any further damage that a Trump presidency could inflict. I wonder if he does win, what more he would do to make sure that both the Supreme and the High Court dance to his tune.
I mean, that's a great question. He appointed in 4 years almost as many justices as Obama did, 54 federal justices at the federal level. Obviously, we already mentioned he appointed 3 justices who were very specific in terms of the way that they supported rulings that fit him perfectly. It's almost as if he personally he appointed judges that would personally defend him. And the average age of justices at the federal level that Trump's appointed is, really young, only 47 years compared to other justices that are on average 5 to 10 years younger. So he could also try to pack the courts. That's something that FDR tried to do in 1937. He could try to appoint more, but again, there's a lot of unknowns about what he's going to do. I think what we do know is he'll try to use the justice system in his favor and ensure that all of these different investigations that are against him will come to an end. And this is likely to be supported by the recent Supreme Court ruling that basically said he can do whatever he wants to do.
Natasha, it's all very worrying. Thank you. That was Natasha Lindstad, who's Professor of Government at the University of Essex. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. It's time to talk aviation now with Murdo Morrison, who's Head of Strategic Content at Flight Global, and he joins us on the line now. Murdo, hello to you. Thanks once again for joining us. Now, it's the Farnborough Air Show next week. Remind us of how significant this event is.
Yeah, the Farnborough Air Show is the biggest event this year, and Farnborough and Paris, the alternating summer air shows, are the events really where the entire industry, that's the commercial airliner part of the business, the defence business, and then all the supply chains get together. So it really is the aerospace and aviation industry's major event of the year.
And one of the key topics of conversation there will be Boeing and the news from Boeing. Is it getting any better?
Well, Boeing has been in trouble really since the first 737 MAX crash in 2018 that led to the grounding of the aircraft. And really since then, with the pandemic and other technical problems with the 787 delays and the 777X, their new flagship, they've just had a whole succession of problems. And of course, that got even worse in January when the door blew out on the 737 MAX Alaska Airlines flight. Now that has led to the CEO announcing that he's going to go, other resignations throughout the organization. So it really cannot get any worse, really, for Boeing, short of them, going out of business, which is almost unconceivable. But there are signs that just maybe, as we approach the Farnborough Air Show, Boeing may be turning the corner. They haven't announced a new CEO yet. They are planning to do that at some point this year, possibly at the Farnborough Air Show. They're buying Spirit Aerosystems, one of their biggest suppliers, and the problems that Spirit led to the door problem with that with Alaska Airlines. They've had lots of problems there, so they're going to be incorporating Spirit Aerosystems. They owned that company way back in the early 2000s. They divested it in 2006. Now they're bringing it back in house. And the other bit of good news for Boeing is that the 777-9, their new flagship, has started flying. So things are just beginning to look up, perhaps, but really the troubles that Boeing have really, really run deep.
What about their rival, Airbus?
Yes, I mean, Airbus, their rival, are really only two companies making aircraft of any significance in the world. It's a duopoly. Now, Airbus, they face a different kind of problem, really. They are really trying to ramp up at the moment. I mean, airline orders are incredibly strong. If you order an aircraft today, you probably won't get it delivered till 2030. So Airbus are desperately trying to ramp up production to produce more aircraft. They're being constrained by problems in the supply chain with engines and other components, and they're finding that difficult. Now, that's a nice problem to have compared to the challenges that Boeing face. But the other problem that Airbus have, or the other challenge, I guess, it's a bit more longer term, and it's what comes next. Their A320 narrow-body aircraft is selling incredibly well. Orders, as I say, stretching into the 2030s. But what next? As the industry tries to hit its sustainability net zero target of 2050, they're going to have to come up with something disruptive in order to do that. They've talked about producing a hydrogen-powered aircraft. Now, will that happen in the 2030s? The technology still seems a long way away for that to happen. End of the 2030s is only 15 years away. And I think that's probably beyond them, unless there's stuff happening that we don't yet know about. But that is a big leap in technology.
Now, Murdo, the Ukraine invasion's prompted many European NATO countries to up their defence spending. What should they be spending it on?
Well, this is an interesting question, isn't it? Because there's all this focus on the UK and other countries. Will they get to that target of 2.5% of GDP? But it's what you spend it on. It's easy to spend money badly. It's spending it on the right equipment, and that, of course, that changes all the time. After 9/11 and Iraq and Afghanistan, the countries in NATO were very much focused on sort of threat from perhaps Middle Eastern Islamist terrorism. Now, since the invasion of Ukraine and perhaps what China's doing as well in the Far East is sort of changed that again, and countries now are looking at what they spend on, what type of equipment they buy. Now, the new Labour government in the UK has got a strategic defence review happening soon, and that will drive many of these decisions. And of course, Farnborough next week is going to be a big showcase of a lot of the defence manufacturers, sort of showing what you can buy. It's going to be a big shop window, really, of the latest equipment. And I think NATO countries, Western countries, are going to have a lot of decisions to make over what they procure and how they view the sort of different threat levels over the next sort of 20, 30 years.
Murdo, thank you very much indeed. That's Murdo Morrison there. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now, in Bangladesh, the High Court reinstated a job quota rule on the 1st of July that reserves 1/3 of civil service posts for children of fighters who participated in the country's liberation movement in 1971. Well, this has prompted weeks of protest, which have now turned violent. After the death of 6 demonstrators, all schools and universities across the country have been ordered to close indefinitely. Well, Zina Tazreen is the senior editor at the Daily Star, Bangladesh's largest English daily, and joins us on the line now from Dhaka. Zina, I wonder if you just quickly explain what the historical context to this is. What is the quota system and why are these public sector jobs so important?
So basically, the public sector jobs are important because the government is the largest employer in the country. And so over the past 15 years or so, we read about Bangladesh being a star performer in terms of economic growth. But turns out that growth was jobless. And Bangladesh is now going through a demographic dividend. Millions of students are graduating from university and they're not getting any jobs. I mean, you have PhD holders applying for blue-collar jobs. That's how bad the situation is. So government being the largest employer, I mean, they should be able to provide these fresh graduates any job. But what happened is as much as 56% of government jobs are reserved for grandchildren of freedom fighters, then women, people with disability, and people who come from underdeveloped districts. So essentially, you have 44% jobs available to people who do not fall in any of these 4 categories. But even that 44% jobs is not based on merit. They're usually handed out to people close to the political party. I mean, question papers for the entrance exams are leaked beforehand and they pass the exams. So essentially, all these university graduates, they're competing for just 5% of the government jobs.
And of course, as we've talked about, these protests have suddenly turned violent. I wonder who's responsible for the violence and if this is a symptom of a wider political problem.
It is. I mean, I would say the protests have been non-violent. It was very peaceful all this while. And then a few days ago, the Prime Minister in a press conference said, justified having the quota in place. Justified having the 56% quota in place, particularly the 30% reserved for grandchildren of freedom fighters. And she followed it up by saying that if the grandchildren of the freedom fighters don't get it, would the grandchildren of Rajakar get the jobs? And Rajakar is a derogatory word in Bangladesh. It's basically a term for those who collaborated with the Pakistan military in 1971. So basically, this is what sparked off the protest on a large scale. Basically, they chanted slogans which said that, who am I? I'm a Rajakar. Who said it? It's the autocrat. And this is what basically ticked off the government, and then the ruling party's student wing, more like the henchmen of the government, they cracked down on the unarmed student protesters. And that's how it turned violent. And then the police were deployed, police and border guard, and they basically opened fire on the students.
Zina, thank you very much indeed. That's Zina Tazreen there, and this is Monocle Radio. Now, nominations for the Emmys, television's most prestigious awards show, were unveiled yesterday. This comes at a challenging time for the TV industry. Cost-cutting and the double strikes of actors and writers delayed the ceremony for 6 months, and they've had a detrimental effect on production houses. Scott Bryan is a TV critic and a broadcaster. He was watching carefully. Scott, has the industry recovered? Was this seen as a big celebration yesterday?
I mean, I think so. I mean, award shows are always an excuse to celebrate in one way or another. But you're certainly right. I think things have certainly sort of had, we're going through quite a difficult time within the industry. I mean, I think what you're having is a lot of change, probably a whole generation's worth of change within a very short amount of time. But you're also seeing the ending of sort of quite big programs, meaning that it feels kind of quite lighter. There's a bit of an absence in the overall nomination. So, of course, last year, Succession was for show, absolutely dominated. Of course, that have ended. You've got The Crown nominated this year, but that is also ending. So you're sort of wondering whether the next generation of big shows are going to come through. And you sort of have some sort of hints. There's kind of many nominations for The Bear, which is that fantastic FX drama, which has been shown now on Disney Plus in the UK. You've got Shogun, which is this kind of incredibly amazing cinematic series based on the James Clavell 1975 best-selling Chronicle. But you wonder kind of how many of these shows are actually going to be sticking around or dominating for the years to come, and that's because of the seismic changes that we're having within the industry.
In terms of who got the most nominations, I know Shogun has done very well, as has The Bear. Only Murders in the Building's right up there too.
Yeah, Only Murders in the Building's got 21 nominations. I mean, this is a kind of fun little true crime caper, which is available on Disney Plus in the UK, about sort of three individuals who love true crime podcasts so much that they decide to actually start investigating their own crimes. I mean, I think what is unique about this one is that it is sort of really quite funny in an overall kind of awards nominations list, which doesn't really have that much humour at all. I mean, I think one sort of kind of talking point yesterday was how The Bear has been dominating the comedy categories when people are saying, well, it's not really actually that much of a comedy.
No.
So, yeah, so I think that is one that will. I mean, I think also just the fact that there is a big series called Free Body Problem in the outstanding drama series that's been nominated too. I mean, I think Netflix will be relieved because they've spent so much money on it, a ridiculous amount of money, also based on a very well-known book. But the series has recently announced it is coming back for another series, possibly an additional series after that, and then might come to an end. So when we were in the 2010s, there were these big commitments for huge, perhaps decade-long series, endless amounts of money. But you wonder about whether those big, elaborate, shiny series will be made as much in the future, just because, I mean, A, you wonder about whether there's enough audience demand for them, but B, it's also up to whether the streaming services are willing to cough up for them too.
Baby Reindeer, of course, has been a big hit popularly.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's one that was, I think, a show that nobody really anticipated to be as big as it ended up being. It was based on a show by Richard Gadd that he wrote it and performed at Edinburgh. He stars in it too. He's got nominations across the acting, the writing and the starring categories. I mean, of course, this is a show, however, that has created quite a considerable amount of news coverage over the course of the last few months after allegations that one of the people who he is depicting is not happy by the portrayal and says it's false. I think we're living in an age in which a lot of people are able to easily find out from the internet and do their own searching. But there's a lot of questions about whether Netflix's kind of story, which they say is based on somebody's lived experience, perhaps was too close to that person's lived experience and allowed kind of a lot of stuff beyond the show to become public currency.
Yeah, and finally, Scott, when will the winners be announced?
Oh, the winner, it's quite soon, isn't it? I think it's like early next month. I mean, this is the thing I find about covering award shows. The moment that one award ceremony is announced, it's then another, and then another. Never-ending supply. And also the thing about the Emmys is that there's so many categories, aren't there?
Yeah. Scott, thank you very much indeed. That's Scott Bryan there. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Carlotta Rebello and Monica Lillis, our researcher, Sana Jumani, and our studio manager, Lily Austin. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be with you for the Continental Shift, and then the briefing is live at midday in London, and the Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.